The guests watched the ceremony turn into a legal nightmare. Mr. Jake Stories welcomes you. I'm so glad you're here, because every story we tell holds a lesson, a tear, and sometimes a miracle. Before we begin, I pray for you. May your life be filled with divine favor, unexpected breakthroughs, and peace that no storm can shake. Don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss a story that could change your life. Now, let's dive into today's story. The warm summer air clung to the skin, fragrant with roses, hydrangeas, and anticipation. A string quartet played a gentle classical melody beneath an ivy-covered pergola. Rows of white chairs filled the lush garden of a private estate just outside Hudson Valley, the air thick with perfume, laughter, and secrets. Lila Braxton, radiant in a custom gown that shimmered with beaded embroidery, clutched her bouquet and took a breath so deep it might have stolen the breeze from the trees. Her groom, Jason Cole, stood toward the altar, grinning with all the confidence of a man who'd beaten every odd in life. He looked flawless, tailored tuxedo, perfectly tousled hair, calm but charged with energy. Cameras clicked from the guest rows. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a society event, a merging of two names, one from wealth and the other from charm and grit. Everyone who was anyone had shown up, but they weren't ready for what would happen next. Just as the officiant raised his voice to speak, the double doors at the back of the aisle slammed open with a thunderous echo. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. There, framed in the grand archway like a courtroom drama scene, stood William Braxton, billionaire real estate mogul, father of the bride, and architect of power. He was flanked by two attorneys and a uniformed deputy sheriff, one hand holding a thick envelope, the other already raised to command silence. "This wedding is not legal," he declared, voice cold, heavy with finality. Silence fell. One woman dropped her champagne glass. A child began to cry. The officiant stood frozen. Jason turned pale. Lila's mouth dropped open, her hand loosening on the bouquet. What followed would be dissected by the media for weeks. But the truth behind it had started long before this moment. Before the flowers, before the dress, before the invitations were ever printed. William Braxton was a man who believed in structure. He built his empire from concrete and glass, brick by brick, deal by deal. He came from nothing, and made sure that the word nothing would never again describe anything related to his family. Love, to him, was not a soft, flowing feeling. It was a series of commitments, contracts, and conditions. He loved his daughter, fiercely, but in his eyes, love meant protection, and protection often looked like control. He'd raised Lila mostly alone after her mother, Margaret, died when Lila was 11. In the years that followed, he had done what he believed was best. He gave her the finest education, the best tutors, the safest environments, and a life so padded in luxury she never had to know the desperation he came from. What he didn't give her, what he didn't even know how to give, was vulnerability. Lila grew into a headstrong woman, intelligent, outspoken, and restless. She inherited her father's confidence, but not his craving for control. She pushed boundaries, traveled alone, dated people outside their social circle. And when she met Jason Cole at a charity art gala 2 years ago, William's world began to shift. Jason had that elusive quality, charisma. A man from modest beginnings, he climbed up fast in the world of tech marketing. Smooth-talking, effortlessly likable, and painfully aware of his effect on others. He courted Lila with grace and passion. Within 6 months, they were living together. Within a year, they were engaged. To the world, they looked like a power couple in the making. But to William, it felt like watching a con unfold. He'd seen men like Jason before. He'd once been one. Men who studied power, learned to mimic it, then found shortcuts to grab it. William knew the signs. The way Jason dodged questions about his past, the curated life he displayed on social media, the vague answers about where his early funding had come from. At first, William kept his concerns private. He tried to be supportive. But when Jason refused the idea of a prenuptial agreement, citing trust, William's internal alarms became sirens. Lila, hurt by her father's accusations, told him he was trying to sabotage her happiness because he couldn't control it. She accused him of never trusting her to make her own decisions. Their argument became more frequent, louder, crueler. At one point, Lila told him. You control people the way your buildings control light. By design, not care. She moved out of the family's Long Island estate and into a Manhattan apartment with Jason. For 6 months, William didn't hear from her, but he didn't stop watching. He hired private investigators under the guise of business security, instructing them to dig into Jason Cole's past with surgical precision. He paid for sealed records, old court documents, financial audits. It took time. Jason was careful, but eventually they found it. Jason had not always been Jason Cole. His birth name was Justin Coleman, and at 22, he was part of a failed tech venture that had crashed amid allegations of securities fraud. Though never criminally charged, he was named in a class action suit. The records were sealed under a youth privacy clause when he agreed to financial restitution and changed his name during relocation. William didn't see a mistake made by a young man. He saw a calculated reinvention. He confronted Lila with the information. She accused him of stalking, of digging into Jason's life like he was a corporate acquisition. He told me everything, she said. You think you're protecting me, but you're just terrified of losing control. Control, William replied, is what keeps people like me from being ruined by people like him. Lila refused to cancel the wedding. She told him she'd moved it forward to escape the circus of scrutiny. It would be private, small, and without his blessing. 2 nights before the ceremony, William stood alone in his office, the skyline of Manhattan gleaming through his windows. The investigator handed him the last document, a financial affidavit. It showed that Jason had leveraged Lila's name for a new investor deal in a crypto startup. Her signature was on the document. She may have signed unknowingly, but it didn't matter. Jason had used her, and that, to William, was a final betrayal. He made the call. His legal team worked overnight. They argued that Jason's past constituted fraudulent identity, that the financial document violated state investment law, and that the impending marriage could be subject to a legal dispute over coercion or deception. It was thin, but with William's connections and resources, it was enough. A judge signed the injunction. He had just one goal now: stop the wedding before a bad decision became a permanent mistake. And so, as the orchestra played and the guests laughed and toasted and smiled for photos, William Braxton walked through the doors with a deputy and a stack of papers that would shatter the moment. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He walked with purpose, his tailored suit catching the sun like armor. Jason stayed in stunned silence. Lila, heart pounding, felt her life unraveling like thread in water. William didn't speak with malice, just finality. This wedding is halted by court order, effective immediately, he said, holding the document high. There are pending legal proceedings regarding the groom's identity and financial actions involving my daughter. He looked at Lila, his eyes not hard, but hollow. I'm sorry, Lila, but I won't let you throw your life away. The deputy stepped forward. Jason backed away, trying to speak, but the murmurs drowned him out. One of the attorneys handed the officiant a copy of the order. The man stepped back, helpless. Lila's bouquet fell to the ground. The guests whispered. Phones were raised. The wedding was over. But what William didn't realize, what no legal document could control, was that the cost of what he'd done would be more than a headline. It would be measured in the silence that followed, the trust broken, and the truth he still didn't know. Because Lila had known all along. And she had chosen love, not blindly, but bravely. And William Braxton had just shown the world that he would rather control his daughter than believe in her. And for the first time in his empire-building life, William Braxton began to wonder, what if he'd been the one who needed saving? The air hung with unbearable stillness after the court order was served. No one moved. The guests looked at each other in confusion, eyes darting between the deputy, the officiant, and the groom now cornered by the sudden legal ambush. Lila Braxton stood frozen at the altar, her breath catching in her throat as though the entire world had stopped spinning. Her father's voice, though calm, had sounded like a gavel striking through her heart. The thick envelope he held trembled slightly in his hand, but his expression remained fixed, stoic, righteous, absolute. He didn't look at her like a father interrupting his daughter's wedding. He looked like a man winning a case. That realization hit harder than the actual court order. Jason tried to move toward Lila, but one of the deputies stepped in. Sir, you've been served. You are required to appear in court by Monday. Please step aside. The weight of the moment crushed the ceremony like glass underfoot. Guests were whispering now, half shocked, half eager to spread what they were witnessing. Lila, trembling, took one step back. Her bouquet had slipped from her fingers when her father first burst in, now lying crumpled in the aisle like a discarded truth. Her eyes darted between Jason and William. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice almost too soft to hear. "I tried to protect you," William replied, turning to her now, his tone measured. "You don't understand what is capable of. I couldn't let this continue." "Not like this," she said, louder now, pain breaking through her composure. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. You weaponized the law against your own daughter." "I did what any father would do if they knew what I knew," he said. Jason stepped forward again, hands raised. "Lila, I can explain. This is all twisted. I told you about the name change. I told you I had a past. I never lied to you. Then why didn't you fight the prenup?" William snapped. "Why did you hide the investor filing? You signed documents with her name, used her name to legitimize your pitch. You think I wouldn't find out?" Lila turned to Jason, blinking rapidly. "Is that true?" Jason's eyes flinched. "I was going to tell you. I needed investors to believe in us, and—" "You used my name," she asked, voice cracking. The silence that followed wasn't just about answers. It was about the space where trust had lived and just died. Jason lowered his eyes. Gasps moved through the crowd like a slow wave. What started as a dream wedding now teetered into a scandal worthy of headlines and ruin. The officiant quietly stepped back from the couple, signaling that the ceremony was no longer in progress. Aunt Eliza, sitting in the front row, stood up slowly. Her cane clicked softly against the stone floor as she made her way to Lila, placing a steadying hand on her trembling arm. Eliza leaned in and whispered something, then walked her away from the altar, guiding her toward the house. The guests parted as they passed, some trying to offer comforting looks, others failing to hide their morbid curiosity. Jason stood alone at the altar now, facing William, who hadn't moved. Their eyes locked. There was no violence, no shouting, just a long, bitter silence between two men who believed they were right. "This isn't over," Jason said quietly. "You may have stopped a wedding, but you didn't stop the truth." "You're right," William replied. "The truth is just beginning." Later that evening, the estate was deserted. Guests had left, shaken and whispering, their faces pale with disbelief. The string quartet had long since packed up. The once beautiful arbor, still draped in soft fabric and flowers, stood like a ghost of a ceremony that never was. Inside, William sat alone in the drawing room, a tumbler of scotch untouched on the table beside him. His tie hung loose around his neck. The silence was louder now. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt something closer to regret, though he couldn't yet admit it. He'd won the battle. But had he lost the war? Aunt Eliza entered without knocking. She leaned on the doorframe for a moment, studying him. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between pity and exhaustion. "She won't forgive you quickly," she said. William didn't look at her. "I didn't ask her to." "You think you protected her today?" "I know I did. She was going to marry a man with secrets. Secrets you helped expose. Fine. But you didn't protect her, William. You embarrassed her. You humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. You took her moment and made it about your fear." "I did what I had to do," he replied, too quickly. She wouldn't listen. She was going to throw her life away. Eliza walked slowly toward him, then sat opposite. No, she was going to learn. And maybe she would have gotten hurt. Maybe she would have come to you after. But at least it would have been her choice. Instead, she learned something else, that she can't trust you. William flinched. "You want to know the worst part?" Eliza said, leaning in. She knew about his past. He looked up sharply. "She told me last month. She knew about the sealed court records, about the name change. He told her. She believed in redemption, and she believed in herself. She thought she could be someone who offered grace." William sat back, stunned. She said, "Auntie, I'm not naive. I'm choosing him with full knowledge. Isn't that what love is supposed to be? He shook his head. Why didn't you tell me? You never made space for her to tell you anything, Eliza said softly. You just judge. You don't protect people by replacing their choices with your control. I was trying to save her, he whispered. Maybe. Or maybe you were trying to save the version of her you thought you could manage. Eliza stood, her eyes full of sadness. I love you, William. But this wasn't strength. It was fear disguised as love. And now she knows the difference. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Lila's absence filled the estate like a shadow. Her belongings had been collected while he was in meetings. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Emails bounced back unread. William sat at the head of his long dining table, the silence so complete it rang in his ears. For days, he tried to reach her. Once, he stood outside her office building, waiting. She didn't come out. He sent letters, apologies, attempts at explanation. No response. He began to review the footage of the wedding. The moment his voice rang through the air, her face, frozen in shock, shifting to pain. The court order in his hand, held like a weapon. His words, I won't let you throw your life away. He wondered if she heard what he really meant. I don't trust you to live your life. And it gutted him. Jason, meanwhile, had disappeared from the spotlight. He gave one exclusive interview to a news outlet, defending his past and denying financial exploitation. He claimed love. He said he regretted the timing of everything, but not the relationship. William watched it, but Lila didn't. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. It was a Thursday afternoon when William finally received a letter, not a call, not an email, but a letter handwritten in Lila's unmistakable script. It was brief. No bitterness, no accusations, just clarity. She wrote that she had ended things with Jason, not because of the wedding, but because she realized she had been trying to fix him instead of facing herself. She wrote that she had left for Europe, alone, to find out who she was without his shadow or her father's. And she wrote, I may have needed saving, but not from Jason, from the version of myself that still hoped for your approval. William read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it and placed it in the breast pocket of his suit. He walked into his office, past the glass trophies and awards. He sat at his desk and stared at the skyline he had once ruled with total confidence. And for the first time in decades, William Braxton didn't know what to do next. He could fix failing towers, negotiate billion-dollar deals, outmaneuver any rival. But he couldn't rebuild the trust of a daughter whose wedding he had stopped, not with money, not with power, not even with regret. All he had now was time. And the deafening question in his mind, had he saved her, or just lost her completely? Autumn crept over the Braxton estate with quiet indifference. The hedges turned russet and gold, the once bustling grounds now silent except for the wind sighing through bare trees. The air no longer buzzed with wedding preparations or family laughter. It carried only stillness and an ache of absence. William Braxton moved through his mansion like a ghost haunting the kingdom he had built. Everything around him bore the fingerprints of his success, the fine art, the rare woods, the gleaming marble. Yet none of it could touch the hollowness growing inside him. It had been 6 weeks since the wedding that never was. Lila hadn't returned home, hadn't responded to any of his messages, hadn't spoken a word to him since the moment he tore her wedding apart with a court order. He told himself he had done what was necessary, exposed the truth, protected his daughter, but that narrative rang emptier with each passing day. The world had seen a powerful man take control, but he had felt the moment she looked at him and stopped seeing a father. Business had become a blur. He attended board meetings, answered questions, signed documents, but he wasn't truly present. His thoughts looped endlessly back to Lila's face at the altar, the look that wasn't fear or anger, it was disappointment. That image haunted him. She hadn't just been blindsided, she had been betrayed. The Braxton name had taken a few hits in the media, but public perception was mixed. Some praised William for unveiling Jason's secrets and saving his daughter from a lifetime of deception. Others criticized the spectacle, the legal ambush, the lack of communication, the display of power. Blogs, talk shows, and social media debated his actions like a courtroom drama. Jason Cole, for his part, kept a low profile. After a single media interview, he withdrew from public view. William's private investigator reported that he quietly shuttered his startup, returned all outstanding investments, and relocated to Chicago. His relationship with Lila had officially ended, but that didn't bring William peace. He'd stopped the wedding. Yes, he'd removed the risk, but he hadn't healed what was broken. He hadn't rebuilt the bridge between himself and the only person who had ever truly mattered. One morning, he stood in his private study, watching the leaves fall beyond the tall glass windows. He pulled a letter from his pocket, a letter he'd read more than a dozen times. Lila's handwriting, her decision to leave, not with Jason, but alone. She'd written that she needed to find out who she was without the gravity of her father's expectations weighing her down. She hadn't written it out of spite. There was no bitterness, only resolve. "I forgive you," she had written, "but that doesn't mean I trust you." Those words pierced deeper than any court order ever could. William sat at his desk and opened a blank notebook. For a moment, the pen hovered in his hand, uncertain. Then he began to write. Not legal notes or contracts, not business strategies, just thoughts. He wrote about fear and love, about pride mistaken for protection. He wrote about how he'd spent his life turning vulnerability into a weakness and how that had cost him the one thing he couldn't buy back. He wrote for hours. When he stopped, he looked down at what he created and realized he hadn't been writing for her. He had been writing to understand himself. Days later, he called Miriam Tate, his longtime legal counsel and friend. She entered his office with a usual calm demeanor, but with wary eyes. "I need your help," he said. "Not for a lawsuit, for something else." He handed her the notebook, now filled with pages of reflections and regret. "I want to publish it," he said. "An op-ed, not in my name as CEO, just as a father who made a mistake." She read a few pages and looked up. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted, "but it's the only thing I can do that doesn't feel like control." Within a week, the article appeared in the New York Times. Titled "What I Learned When I Stopped My Daughter's Wedding," it made immediate waves. In it, William Braxton spoke not as a billionaire, not as a power broker, but as a man who realized too late that control had replaced trust in his family. He detailed the days leading up to the wedding, the evidence against Jason, the court order, but more importantly, he described what came after, the silence, the regret, the painful revelation that even a justified act can be wrong if done without compassion. "I mistook fear for love," he wrote, "and in doing so, I robbed my daughter of a moment, her voice, and her choice." The reaction was immediate. The article went viral. Some praised his honesty, calling it a rare moment of humility from a man of wealth and influence. Others called it a PR stunt, an elaborate attempt to rewrite a narrative that had made him look like a villain. But the words had their intended target. Lila read them. She was sitting alone in a hostile courtyard in Portugal, surrounded by travelers and strangers who knew nothing of the Braxton name. She had just returned from a hike along a cliffside trail, tired and sunburned, when her phone lit up with a message from Aunt Eliza. "You need to read this." She hesitated, but eventually she clicked the link and read every word. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't restore trust. But it was the first time her father had ever publicly admitted he was wrong about anything. She didn't call him, but she did send a postcard. It arrived 2 weeks later at the Braxton estate, addressed in her handwriting. It was short. "I read it. I needed to. Thank you for trying to understand. I'm still figuring things out. L." William held the card for a long time. Just holding it felt like hope. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a reply, a door not closed. He carried that card in his wallet from then on. Winter arrived early that year. Snow dusted the city like powdered sugar. Christmas lights blinked from windows, and people filled the streets in coats and scarves, rushing towards celebration and warmth. William found himself back at the family's lake house upstate, the place where Margaret had once planted wildflowers and where Lila had learned to swim. It had always been their quiet place, untouched by business or status. It was there that he waited, unsure if she would come. But on the second evening, just as the sun dipped below the hills, a car pulled into the driveway. Lila stepped out, bundled in a gray coat and scarf. She looked older, more grounded, more certain. William stood on the porch, hands in his pockets. They didn't speak immediately. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes scanning the trees, the snow-dusted dock, the porch swing they'd built together when she was 14. Finally, she spoke. "I still dream about that day sometimes." "So do I," he said. "I keep thinking if you had just talked to me, really talked to me, it could have been different." "I didn't know how," he admitted. They sat on the swing together. It creaked softly beneath them. The wind rustled the trees. "I want to try again," he said. "Not as a fixer?" she asked. "No, as a father who's finally ready to listen." She nodded, tears brimming but not falling. "I don't need you to fix my life," she said. "I need you to trust that I can live it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the child he had tried to protect, but the woman she had become. And for the first time, he didn't feel the urge to plan or control, only to be present. They didn't fix everything that night, but they started something new. In the months that followed, William stepped back from several business ventures. He donated a portion of his fortune to support mentorship programs for underprivileged youth, especially those with criminal records trying to rebuild. He gave public talks, not about business, but about fatherhood and the dangers of loving with conditions. Lila returned to New York eventually, not to move back in, but to start a nonprofit dedicated to ethical business mentorship. She and William met for lunch once a week, always at a modest cafe, always without an agenda. They still had disagreements, still had wounds, but now they had conversations, too. And sometimes that was enough. One afternoon, as they sat across from each other drinking coffee, William asked, "If you could go back, would you still have married him?" Lila smiled, but her eyes held something deeper. "No, but not because of what you did. Because I changed, and I needed to. Maybe we both did." He nodded. Then, quietly, she asked, "If you had the power to stop me again, knowing what you know now, would you still do it?" He didn't answer right away. After a long pause, he said, "No, I'd let you choose, even if it broke me." She reached across the table and took his hand. And for the first time, William Braxton truly understood that loving someone doesn't mean building walls around them. It means standing at the gate and trusting that they know how to walk through it. And so he did.